Thank you, Greg. I appreciate all your work on this. It's kind of amazing to me, the arguments that you're getting from people in Uganda sound just like the arguments that historic, or even that you might get here in the United States. So my real question was, and it seems strange to me that people so far distant would actually come up with the exact same arguments that came up here. So do you think that's what's happening? Do you think they're coming up on their own with the exact same arguments? Or are they getting back in touch with someone either in the United States or connected in the United States and getting those arguments and rehearsing them to you?
I think it's all U.S. origin. There's a network of Bible colleges and congregations that support those Bible colleges in many nations, and they have individuals who are the scholars that keep all of that well in hand. So what I happened into was just a wasp's nest of a multiple cup college with congregations in a cluster that were tightly controlled by that Bible college. I just happened to luck into that. With the posts, I had people say, "You're invited to come here to preach." Well, then I posted my schedule my first time. It's like, here's where I'm going to be. And then gradually people started saying, no, we're going to have to not invite you. They're like, well, why? Well, because you preach one cup. Well, somebody from the United States had been notified that there's this preacher coming through. Do we know him? And it's like, no, no, no. And then the reactions started. So it's all U.S. origin. I've not found anyone yet who will say, I have studied this deeply on my own, and here are my comments. And here's why. Just like a philosopher will never determine the Lord's truth, no one reading the accounts of the Lord's Supper will ever come up with multiple cups. You just can't. You can't get there from that. So you have to do it first and then try to find a reason to justify it. Because to read what was done in the accounts is always very, very clear and easy to understand. So I think it's all U.S. origin based, and I think it's like that old adage, follow the money. So where does the money come to support these Bible colleges around the world? And then what truths must they espouse in order to keep their funding intact? So I think what we poked at was a tip of the iceberg with all of that.
David Peake.
Greg, thank you. I'm not going to relitigate all the conversations we've had over the years. I do want to highlight a couple things, though, that we've talked about that I appreciate your presentation so very much. I've been told by U.S. Cups preachers that, we innovated the one cup. It just stuns me. I think something you said today kind of got me a source. I might have found where they got that from now, finally. Metonymy, we're being abused with metonymy now in a way that's bizarre, and so that's been strange. But where I'm working, I'm coming across something that I had not heard before, and that is we bless one cup and then we distribute. That was new to me, and I don't know if that's something you're hearing. But the question I have for you, and because this is recorded, I've been asked this question by one of our brethren. And I want to see if maybe you can answer this. I've never asked this to you before, so this is new for me. The brethren overseas that I'm talking to, they pour into their mouth. I'm fine with that. They drink from their bottled water the same way. They pour into their mouth. It's very awkward for me to try to reproduce, and so I don't try it too much. But they don't use a cup. They use a kettle with a spout. And so the brother in the U.S. said to me, that's not a poterone. That's not a cup. It's not a drinking vessel. So it's unscriptural. I can't get there. I think if they're drinking from it, it's a drinking vessel. But maybe you might address that.
Well, when congregations have big meetings, a lot of times we observe the communion out of a flower vase. That is and can be used as a cup, a drinking vessel. So we've always taken the argument that anytime there's a large crowd, because how do you have the Lord's Supper with 3,000 people after Pentecost? Well, they broke up into homes to observe congregational worship. But whenever you have a large crowd, you increase the size of the drinking vessel that's needed to cover the size of the crowd. We don't have two, one for each side, and we don't start over in the middle by refilling the cup. We have a container large enough. If that doesn't work, if we can't do that, if we can't pass that wash tub full of grape juice, then we need to tell people to go worship somewhere else. And we need to have another congregation observing the Lord's Supper. Now the practice, so anyway, that's one aspect of that. It is a poterion when it is used as a drinking vessel. Now, I'm not advocating that you use your Western boot as the next drinking vessel where you go. I think it can be ridiculous and distracting if we're not careful. So even those who use a flower vase for a large meeting, they have to be careful that the design of what they're using is not distracting in any way. And so I say that to say this about India. In my visits there, those brethren have a practice of their culture to pour into their mouth whatever they're drinking from. And if you see somebody get a bottle of water, you will see them pour it into their mouth. And so it is a natural thing for them then in the Lord's Supper to do the same thing, because that is how they drink from a drinking vessel. For convenience, some of them, not all, some of them use a small pitcher, if you will, that has a type of a spout. And others in India use just a regular cup like we have of some material, and they still pour it into their mouth, even if they use that same approach. Now, Jacob and I were there together one time, and it's whenever you encounter something like that, it's like I hadn't practiced, I didn't know quite what to do, and now here's how I solve it now. It's like, brother, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go last. Why? Because I cannot concentrate on pouring something into my mouth and observing the Lord's Supper at the same time. Besides that, when I did that, I poured grape juice all down my shirt. And Jacob did the same thing. And it's like, here we are. And it's like, man, this is the Lord's Supper. And this is not right. So I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it had nothing to do with how they drank from the one cup, because they do drink from the one cup. But I don't see a requirement that your lips touch that cup, but you are drinking from the cup and not through an artificial means of any type. So whenever that's at least my view on that, and someone else may have a different view that I'll gladly pay attention to. And so whenever we have that, whenever I'm faced with a picture like that, it's like, no, I'm not going to do that, because I'm not going to take my mind off of what I'm doing here. The others who have been raised, even a bottle of water is poured into their mouth, they don't think a thing about it. They don't even think about how they're drinking out of the one cup, but they do have one cup from which they drink, from which they all drink.
Nathan Batty.
Thanks, Brother Greg, for your presentation and for what you're doing. I think this is helpful in sharing it with some people in this country that don't understand what's the big deal, where's this go back to, how did all this develop. I wanted you to put up your chart, the Remember Path of Innovation chart. You used it a couple of times.
Well, I may have passed. No, I haven't passed it yet.
There we go. This is a really good chart, and I'd really encourage young guys to take a look at that and really study on that. Think about this. First, begin a practice that's desired for some supposedly good reason. Innovations don't usually come about out of bad motives necessarily. It's usually a good thing. A phrase that gets used sometimes is mercy. We want to do something in mercy. What's most important? Mercy, not sacrifice, is what will be quoted. Motivation may be good. The question is there authority for what we're doing? Mm-hmm. And there are things that come up from time to time, new technology, number of different things that may be good, may be acceptable, may not be acceptable. And I would just encourage people, tread slowly and gracefully what ends up happening is something gets introduced, and once it's introduced, there's a precedence, and it's hard to step back from that.
Yeah.
And when we just start off saying, this is good, we can accomplish a lot of good, and we just bore ahead with it, we end up causing some challenges or issues, or there are unintended consequences that we didn't see because we just rushed into things. And so I would just encourage us to walk slowly and gracefully. And I'd also say that whenever we have conflict about things that we have some questions about, generally speaking, there are solutions that can be had that do not include controversy or division.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage us to think down those lines.
So I have brothers in the church who are preachers who love me enough to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. And that needs to be okay for all of us. Because we can go down a path of those good ideas, those worthy things, and we can end up with missionary societies. It's like, what? We can end up with, you talk about justifying things for a supposedly good cause. You think about instrumental music. Now, some people can sing, some can't. Now, they can all sing, but they can't carry a tune in a bucket. And you get a congregation full of folks that couldn't pass the tune if it was chewed up by them. They couldn't get to the tune in a song, and that's the kind of people where it says our singing is horrible. We need a piano. Well, it's true their singing was horrible, but there's no scriptural authority for instrumental music. So along comes germs. It's like, oh, we've got to have individual cups. It's like all of a sudden, instead of the scriptures driving the practice, you have someone's supposed good idea that is instituted, forced in place. And when my great-grandparents were in Knoll, Missouri, it was announced there were going to be multiple cups on the Lord's table the very next Sunday. And that is when my great-grandparents on my mother's side sold out their farms and business and moved to Missouri, the part of Missouri where Homer King was, because they had known of the congregation at Lee Summit where Homer King was and knew that the worship was correct. They didn't stay and fight that because they thought they were going to be overwhelmed, and they probably would have been. And so that was an example of somebody making a change. They did not consider at all what the truth said. They did not consider what other families said. They just said, this is what it's going to be. And we can end up doing the same things if we're not careful. The Sunday school, my, what a great idea. All these kids running around England, uneducated, ruffians, and let's just gather them in on Sunday, Robert Briggs, and we'll teach them. They'll be good kids. Well, except there's no scriptural precedence for that. And so we end up with these practices that we think we can justify, and if we're not careful as God's people, we'll say, oh, well, that should be okay. So all of a sudden you say, well, Sunday school for you, none for us, but we're okay. Missionary society for you, none for us. Cups for you, none for us. All of a sudden, we're saying nothing matters. And what have we left behind? We've left behind the scripture, because there are things that do matter.
Brother Melvin Blaylock.
Just kind of share a funny little story with you. It's probably been 35 years or 40 years ago, but I knew a man who was going to this Brown Trail School of Preaching, which is not very far from here, and he wanted me to come over and talk to some of the people. So Brother Gerald Hill and I at that time went over there to have a visit with him, and of course they weren't about to let us address the group. We talked to one of the instructors over there, and we had quite a discussion with him. And I pulled out of my briefcase a copy of one of the commentaries, the Gospel Bible commentary on Mark. And I read to him C.E.W. Doris's comments about the Lord's Supper, and probably most of us have read that, but it's always been kind of incredible to me. I guess that commentary must have been published early part of the 20th century, probably. But it just very expressly states how it's supposed to be one loaf and one cup. And Brother Doris is very explicit about that. And I read that instructor, it really took him back. He had never read that apparently,
Yeah.
and to see it in the Gospel Bible commentary. But I don't know if they ever changed that or not. I have one of the older sets of commentaries, but W.C. Doris, who preached among that group, but he really insisted it ought to be one loaf and one cup all the way.
There are some great resources in the Brotherhood, and you can go straight to the stuff that our brethren have done. And again, I can't recommend enough George's site with his notes on all those things. Those are so helpful. And yes, we can look those things up, but it would take me years to find the things that are just easily found in his guide. And so commentaries like C.E.W. Doris and those, they may not be around these days, but they're all very helpful. And so what are we looking for? We're looking for tools in our tool bag with which we can combat error. And you never know when an opportunity is going to come. Now, I've written several people in the Oklahoma City area saying, talk to me about, would you be willing to talk to me about your Lord's Supper practices? I'm from one loaf, one cup congregation, and would you be willing to talk to me about your practices in the Lord's Supper? And the replies that I get back are, none. None. So far, none. And if they were willing to talk, I'd at least go meet them and say hi, but many times these days, in an issue like that, they don't know about it, they don't want to know about it, and they're not interested in hearing from you about it. Well, if that's the world, then we find another open door.
Art Lynch.
Brother Greg, really appreciate your presentation and really just all the experiences. I'd like to share kind of a little bit of a contrary experience that I had when we started studying with a number of the preachers around the Phoenix area that were used the multiple cups classes, and even one that was using alcoholic wine. I heard you mention that experience. There was one particular preacher that we started studying with, and actually he was shocked to kind of hear those things about the communion, the way that the Bible presents it. And he was at the time planning a annual preacher study for the cups and classes people for the state of Arizona. And at that time we began to study, and he very honestly admitted that he couldn't disagree at all with the positions that we were taking on the one cup. And so we were thrilled about that, but we challenged him to bring that to the congregation's attention, and let's work on starting to work with the people in the congregation to help their understanding also grow to what he had seen and learned. And basically that year he was coordinating the preacher study, and I was invited to speak in Tucson before about 200 of the preachers with the Cups and Classes group. I talked from the standpoint of like you were saying, they had one of the whiteboards, and so I just wrote 3 statements on the board: this blank is my body, this blank is my blood, and this blank is the New Testament. And then I talked about the communion, went through the passages and everything. At the end of that, there was a preacher that asked a question about John 6, and really was implying that was the communion that Jesus was talking about. And he said he was just, kind of shocked that I hadn't taken that into consideration. And I said, well, brother, I'm shocked that you think that was the communion there. And basically, that was the only question I got out of 200 preachers in that room. And so I filled in the blanks, and I said, if any of you brethren disagree with these statements Jesus made, let's talk about it. Not one of them came up afterwards to talk about that. But the individual that had arranged the study and everything, he did talk to me some more and studied with me some more and said, I can't tell you that any of that's wrong, but I also can't tell you that the people want to change the way they do things, because they don't. And so just
Sounds like it was a great opportunity.
well, and the whole point was is the silence in the room, even though there weren't a lot of questions and statements, let me know that the clarity of God's word is still there. Because there was at least an understanding that Jesus' statements were clear, and even though they didn't want to change at that time.
I'll compare this to issues in relationships. Individuals can get themselves into such a mess that it's like a can of worms, and you don't know where to start to help them recover to get to the point where they might be part of a normal, functioning, healthy relationship. Now, that's the working of Satan. And the working of Satan in the Lord's church is the same way. Individuals get so embroiled in error, they cannot see a path out. Because we're sitting there saying, can't you see that it's 1 cup and 1 loaf? And they may say, yes, but can't you see my house payment? Can't you see my family is all involved where I am? Can't you see that this is my education, this is my history, this is what people depend on? And it takes a tremendous amount of strength and courage to walk away from a life that is well organized. And I think all of that is behind the scenes of Satan's doings in the lives of men. If you just get somebody well organized enough in any religion, they will nearly find it impossible to leave. And they may know the truth, they may cry, they may walk away, they may say, isn't there a way that we can do both? Can I be okay? Can't I just be a member of the 1 cup and not use 1 cup? And I think it's a satanic thing that we deal with, and we need to recognize it is so hard when we present these truths, because people are saying, I see what he's saying, but I wouldn't know where to start to do this. So.
Okay, we have one more, and it's Brother Glenn Osborne.
In 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 17 and 18, in giving this instruction, I do not praise you because you come together not as for the better, for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear the division exists among you, and in part I believe it. That's not usually something we read. We usually go down to verse 23. And my point of bringing out that is, I think that sometimes explaining to them that that is an important part of this instruction is that the Lord's Supper is a congregational act, not a church universal act. Mm-hmm. And they have the concept that this is a church universal thing. Yeah. And you have to tell them, no, context, when you come together as a church, and Paul was using this to help them with their division problem. I mean, chapter 1, I hear the divisions exist among you, and in part I believe it. He's using the communion, and also using 1 Corinthians 10, 16, 17 as well. But what I'm trying to say is, I think it is helpful, and it has been in my studies, for me to point out when I'm studying this issue with people, to just first of all ask the question, do you think the communion is a universal church or a local church? Mm-hmm. And read that passage and says, context, they were talking about a local church. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they don't have that. They've never heard that concept, that the Lord's Supper is a congregational act. I just wanted to know if that's helpful.
So within the last year, I've overheard a family from the Multiple Cup Church. They were getting ready to leave the next day to go home from where we were at the same place, and it was going to be the Lord's Day. And they said, well, we have a live service, and so we'll just have communion in the car. and listen as they drive down the road. And it's like, well, you know how to mix every possible error in religion into one fell swoop. But they had no consciousness of the need to be together in one place. So again, as you say, those things we just think, well, everybody knows that. It's like, well, no, they don't, because they haven't been taught. It's been 100 years since these things swept the country and the church. And so what we may presume is commonly known, it's never even been heard of by most religions, let alone people in the multiple cup church.
I think one of the things in the last few months that I've helped develop that, including that information, is as I say, I came into a congregation. I said, I've noticed how you've offered the communion. There was a basket with Ziploc bags of loaf and a cup in it, and you could just take it or we'll do whatever. It just said communion underneath it, and I talked to them about that. I said, is that offering communion? I said, is this how you do it? And is that the way they did it in the early church? And it was really, like, oh my, But that's the way you're correct. They have no concept of this being a congregational act. But anyway.
Okay. Thank you, brother. Appreciate your presentation and everything. You have anything you'd like to say in closing or summary?
So please don't presume that everyone in our congregations understands the Lord's Supper. We have probably talked about the Lord's Supper more in this session than most congregations have heard about the Lord's Supper in 5 years. Just reading the scriptures at the Lord's table is essential. And when somebody gets up and quotes a philosopher when they're waiting on the table, I meet them at the back door to say, I don't want to hear about your well-read philosophy. I want to hear about the Lord and the Lord's Supper. And at a minimum, the verses about the scriptures should be read every time we gather around the Lord's table. What if we have a visitor we haven't seen and they don't know what we're doing? It needs to be explained what we're doing, but that explanation needs to go beyond just reading the beautiful scriptures about the Lord's Supper. And yes, that's kind of getting down into the weeds, but here's what it boils down to. There is no other way to observe the Lord's Supper. It's not a way that we practice, it is the way, it is the only way that we practice the Lord's Supper. And if our congregations do not understand that, then our task is to not only understand it, but to be able to gently and respectfully explain it to someone. Because if they're saying, oh, that's your way, it's like, well, let's talk about that. And until we can have that conversation with others, we won't discover an open door where we are. So let's keep praying for open doors, and let's keep studying, and let's share what we know with our congregations.